So it's a privilege to be here at the Smithsonian Earth Optimism Summit and share with you about 10,000 years of history of the California condor in a very few minutes. So the California Condor program started when there were only 22 birds left in the world. The condor lived among the giants of the day, the American mastodon, the Harlan giant, sloth, and the saber-toothed cat. But of all those giants, it was the only one to survive and be with us still today. The condor is the largest flying bird in North America with a 9.5-foot wingspan. That's 2 feet longer than this. It lives more than 60 years. It can fly more than 200 miles in a single day. As a K-select species, it is slow to produce, with only 1 chick every 2 years. And there's a strong Native American cultural tie with the condor. The condor was extinct in 1987 after a great debate about whether or not the species should be able to die in dignity in one camp or to be able to be survived and safeguarded in 2 zoos because it was not a naturally occurring extinction. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, after that debate and lawsuits, made a very courageous decision to save the condor and safeguard it in sanctuary at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park and Los Angeles Zoo. And that was the foundation for the recovery program. We had to quickly rely on having the only remaining birds in the world at our facility. We had to rely on conservation innovation, literally writing the book on how to save a species that had never been kept before like this. I can tell you there were a lot of sleepless nights in this process. We had to quickly design and develop breeding centers. Our critics would say that the condor would never breed in a zoo. Well, we were able to overcome that. We were able to also take advantage of the species biology by using a technique called double clutching. In the wild, a condor lays 1 egg and raises a chick every 2 years. But if they lost that egg, they would replace it. So we took advantage of that by pulling the first egg, putting it safely in an incubator, allowing our keeper staff at that point to puppet rear the species. You can see by this photograph here that puppet is the lifeline for that chick, making sure it didn't imprint on people because we always wanted to send the bird back into the wild. That was the goal. Behind a curtain there is one of our dedicated keeper staff, and keepers work around the clock 24/7 at this stage caring for these chicks. In our labs at the San Diego Zoo Institute for Conservation and Research, we started genetically map the species because with so few specimens, inbreeding and the effects of that could be very critical to affect the program long term. So every condor is mapped. We take that information, we determine the relatedness, it's put in computer models, and then as a dating site on hormones, it gives us the data we need to care for and select what birds went to what locations. That was also critical in this program because as we started to develop new breeding centers and release sites, we want to make sure we safeguarded the genetics. In the event there was a catastrophic event like a wildfire or a disease outbreak, we wouldn't lose any of those irreplaceable genes. In these same labs, also for the first time, was a technique developed to determine the gender of birds using DNA from blood or eggshell waste. That was also critical for us to set up pairs very quickly. And lastly, at this institute is the frozen zoo. For 30 years, we've been saving cell lines, including California condors, and preserving those for various kinds of studies. And if you look very closely at that little vial there, it's a vial of a northern white rhino, only 3 of those specimens left in the world today. One of the factors that affected condors in the wild, aside from contaminants, was power poles and power lines and electrocutions associated with that. So we developed a technique of aversion training, conditioning condors so they wouldn't try to roost on these kinds of structures. So working with local utility companies, we're able to develop these mock power poles, wire them to deliver a mild electric charge. Condors are very bright. It didn't take them long to figure out that was not a pleasant experience. That affecting that behavior translated to the wild and drastically reduced the electrocutions and the collisions with power lines and power poles. In such a long-running recovery program like this, there are also factors that you can't predict. No one could predict that in 1999, West Nile virus is going to arrive in the United States in New York and it quickly spread to the West Coast. And in its wake, it took human life and the lives of many bird species, and condors were not immune. We worked with the Center for Disease Control and developed a vaccine that today, every bird in the population is vaccinated to safeguard it. That's kind of an easy thing to say, but if you're a biologist risking life and limb in the field and having to get your hands on every bird in the population, you can see the heroic effort that our field biologists have to go to save the species in the wild. One of the factors that we underestimated was how dirty the environment was when we started to reintroduce the species back in the wild. This is what we call microtrash. While people are out enjoying nature, they leave behind a lot of items like bottle caps and plastic and glass. And condors, when they are normally trying to take in calcium, ingest bone fragments. And we theorized that that behavior translated over to picking up this microtrash, which was lethal, if not intervention. You can see by that radiograph there of microtrash in the body of a condor. So now our biologists go out and clean up all the sites that the condors reside in to clean up that microtrash, also putting out now bone fragments so that the birds can actually take up calcium, particularly when females are laying eggs. Condors serve a very important ecological niche. They are the cleanup crew when animals die. And so in those carcasses are toxins that affect humans and other scavenging species, like anthrax and botulism. And condors are completely immune to those toxins. So they're providing a service for an entire ecosystem. While they are indiscriminately feeding on tissue and organ and bone, they also ingest lead from sport hunting. And lead is a toxin that affects condors as it does other life forms. In our country, President Theodore Roosevelt, John James Audubon were hunters. And the hunting community generates about $8 billion a year to preserve species and those habitats that they live in. So it isn't about hunting and sport hunting, but it is about a toxin in the environment, which is lead, which is the single biggest impediment right now for the recovery of a condor program. These two gentlemen are also avid conservationists, as hunters are. And so now working with the hunting community, educating them about what lead effects are to their families when they're feeding venison and game, we've been able to work with the hunting community, and there is an alternate ammunition that is non-lead but has the same ballistic properties so that their sport hunting can continue. We had lead in other products like paint, and we learned that children chewing on their toys and on their cribs were ingesting lead, and we know the detrimental effects to lead in the cognitive realm. We also had it in gasoline, and as a culture and a community, we took it out. We even had it in shotgun shells and removed it and replaced it with steel because it was affecting waterfowl. So we know that we have the ability to do this as a culture. In a program like this, you also have to be anticipatory. What are the next great risks? In our country, using solar and wind is an initiative to try to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, and that's a good program. But we also know these same wind turbines and condors use those same thermals and wind. And we know that raptors, like eagles and hawks, have been killed by wind turbines. So, working with utility companies, we've developed early detection systems, sort of Star Wars technology, where telemetry on condors notifies by signal an operator of a turbine field to be able to turn those turbines off when the risk is imminent. We are fortunate that we haven't had a condor come into collision with a turbine yet. But as you can see in a program like this, there are so many individuals and entities and agencies that are involved to try to save a species. So where are we today? We started with 22 condors in the world. Today there are more than 450, flying free in California and Utah and Arizona and Baja, Mexico. We as biologists tried to put those birds back in the same locations that we found them. We even picked sites like the Grand Canyon because it was so pristine and protected. But condors are condors. And some of them moved up to Utah on their own and began to produce on their own. The species that was once extinct in the wild is now been produced in zoos and breeding centers and released back in the wild and producing their own. Today there are 275 in the wild. We have gone full circle with this species. One of the questions I get asked, why save a species? Why spend so much resource, so much money to save one? On this planet, we live with the most amazing animals and plants. We share the same environments with them all over the world. These precious creatures are telling us how healthy the environment is or not by how their populations are doing. They're either thriving or they're in decline. What we have to do is listen to what those species are telling us. We have to unite. As the alpha species on this planet, we are the stewards. We only have one Earth. We have to make sure that we take care of it everywhere and in every way. We have to fight. To save these species is not going to be easy. It hasn't been. But we have shown that we have the ability, technologically, and the resources to do it. And lastly, we have to ignite. Every generation and every person on this planet, explaining to them how important it is that we coexist with these species. We have the passion. We've had the will. We have the ability. And together, we can end extinction. Thank you.